here with Trevor Gates from the Canadian Mental Health Association. Trevor, thanks for being here.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So we're celebrating Men's Mental Health Month. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how men need support, or if you could talk about the kind of conversations we should be having about men and mental health.
For sure, and it's one of the things we're still kind of figuring out at this time, right? How do we look at that? But I think if we're finding if we lift the helicopter up high, we can see that men are getting together in different things, in different spaces. It's just what are the topics, what are the things that are happening in that. So there are things like called Men's Shed that have where men are actually getting together and sitting in, but they're being specific about some of the topics about being a support person in their family, what's going on, how do we be better with that. So I think creating spaces like that or already existing spaces, like even locker rooms, I'll even say that, can be a place where good mental health can be happening. It's just that we need leaders to kind of talk about things that have traditionally been looked at as maybe signs of weakness, when actually they're signs of strength, when we look at how can we be good providers for our family, for our kids, for like that.
Great. Also, our federal government's introduced a new men's health strategy, and a lot of that focuses around men's mental health as well. I'm wondering if you can comment on this new program. I know there's a consultation process happening right now, but curious if you can comment on this new program.
So for some of the pieces too that I want to look at is again, I like talking about it where one of the things we find a lot with men is it's very difficult in how they express mental health. So typically people talk about depression, anxiety, and there's signs around those. But a lot of times men, because of vulnerability, at times like feeling very vulnerable with that, it comes out as anger a lot of the time. It comes out as removing themselves from context, and they believe that it needs something that needs to be dealt with on their own. So like programs like this that we've been talking about and getting involved in is to stop that and actually kind of rewrite that narrative a little bit and give support to people that actually want to step up and provide leadership for one another, where you don't have to be alone. And anger is kind of, I tease with my son who's 18 years old, I always call it a cheap emotion, that it's kind of, I'm like, well, what's behind all of that? And let's talk about those things and make those a safe thing to talk about instead of having them come out as anger.
Yeah, so you mentioned your son, your 18-year-old son. Yeah. Can you talk about men's health, but also for youth? Like what's the impact of 18 to 25-year-olds? Like what are the challenges they're facing, and how can we better support our youth men across the world, but also in Canada? Like what are some of the tools and strategies we can consider?
For sure, that's a big question. And and I think there's lots of things we're learning with that, and it's definitely we're evolving with what's going on. I know in my own sake, it's something I need to live by example for what I do. I need to keep my anger in check. I got to make sure that I'm rested when I'm coming to deal with things. I've got to be able to say, hey, you know what? I need to just actually kind of take a second back to kind of deal with this and not just kind of be right on top of everything, like kind of emotionally at the time, and be able to talk with my son about it. So like I said, we always do the thing. I'm like, well, what's behind that? When you're talking about, what do you mean by that? Because I said, this came out, but what are the pieces that are going that? And he's actually a little tired of me doing that from time to time, but I also notice him doing it with his friends too, where now, a lot of times people will blame, phones and stuff like that, and I'm not a big fan of the attention, because I think especially as men, and I'll use the word intimacy, we've lacked an intimacy in our discussion and our relationships that I think get pulled away to things like that from electronics and stuff like that that are out there. But I believe that there might be some answers there too. There might be positive ways of reading out. Different communities are being created because of those online things, and they're 24/7, so people can actually reach out to positive things, in that aspect. So those are some of the things kind of deal with, but being involved, and being involved not just as in athletically, to things, which I think is the easiest things for men to be a part of, but also being in a community, and what does a leadership mean? Because I think you see that being talked about a lot more in sports now as well.
Well, thanks. That was a great response. And we're seeing on social media these days, a lot of young men, young women are attracted to social media. Young people are spending a lot of time on Instagram or X or Facebook or other social media, TikTok. We're seeing also the rise of toxic masculinity. Can you comment on that and like the link between toxic masculinity and men's mental health? I know it's you could probably talk about it for hours, but curious if you can quickly comment on a little bit on toxic masculinity, and also what are some other role models that young men could have, especially when it comes to men's mental health?
For sure. So I'm going to start with the last part of the question and then kind of work my way back, because I just had this conversation with my son, and I was asking him who are the people that he values the most, and thinks are the coolest people in his life. And
it was me and you, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so he had actually came up, and he had there was some gangster rap guys that came up. It was that's what he talked about. And I said, okay, you tell me why there's these things. And there were some things that I would say they're very negative, and I would also call toxic masculinity that was present there. And those were the things that he was valuing the most. So I got to have two people that I put up against his, and I said we're going to research the stats on one another. And I used Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King.
Okay.
And I said, talk to me about the two differences in there. And we actually got to do it as a research thing together to look at all that. And he's like, okay, that's pretty cool, what those guys would be able to accomplish. And I was like, that wasn't through toxic masculinity. That was working with people together and talking about positive messaging. So I find that like a really good, kind of good thing. Because toxic masculinity is out there, and and a lot of people define it differently. But I look at it as those things that that maybe men get a dividend from acting, but it's not their true nature, right? So they're actually, it's reinforced in society, but it's actually not where they're at and what they're doing. They don't act like that as a grandfather. They don't act like that as a father, and those things. But it's one of those things that we have to kind of get in touch with and actually shine the light on the things that are a lot more positive, I think.
I like that message of our true nature is a little bit more positive rather than focusing on the negative.
Yeah.
Well, Trevor, I want to thank you for coming on this show and for doing this interview and for doing the great work that you do.
Well, thank you so much.
Continue promoting men's mental health, and hopefully we'll continue to collaborate together.
Awesome. Really appreciate it. Thank you.